In ancient Rome, a woman might bind her chest with a simple cloth band. A man might tie a short loincloth around his hips. Yet neither wore anything resembling modern underwear. No briefs, no panties, no elastic waistband hidden beneath every outfit. So what protected the body before modern underwear existed? And why did this unseen layer eventually shape shame, power, hygiene, and freedom? The first answer is simpler than we expect. People did not begin with underwear. They began with fabric between skin and work. Imagine a farm laborer in a hot, dusty landscape. A narrow strip of linen is wrapped around his waist. It shields sensitive skin from rough tools, sweat, and repeated movement. That garment is a loincloth. It can be the only practical clothing layer. But it is not necessarily primitive. Its material, cleanliness, and cut could reveal status. Linen required labor. It had to be grown, processed, spun, woven, washed, and repaired. A fresh, well-made cloth was valuable. A worn one carried the marks of hard work. Across the ancient world, people solved the same physical problem differently. In Egypt, linen garments met heat with lightness and frequent washing. In other regions, wool offered warmth but held moisture differently against the skin. The hidden layer was never just about covering nakedness. Climate decided what clothing could realistically do. Then came cities, armies, workshops, and crowded public life. A loose outer tunic looked respectable, but it could ride upward while climbing, lifting, or performing. That created a practical need for a garment tied closer to the body. Romans used the word sublegaculum for a loincloth or brief-wrapped garment. It appears in images of athletes, laborers, and stage performers. A famous Roman mosaic shows women exercising in fitted bands in brief lower garments. Their clothing was made for motion, not the later ideal of shaping the body. For a performer, this close layer prevented an outer costume from becoming a hazard. For an athlete, it allowed movement while preserving a measure of public modesty. For an enslaved worker, it could be basic workwear, not a private luxury. But that same visible garment carried social risk. A wealthy Roman citizen was expected to appear in a tunic or toga. The toga needed drape, space, and the controlled posture of someone not doing manual labor. A short wrapped cloth suggested the arena, the workshop, the bath, or the stage. It signaled a body at work. That distinction mattered because Roman status depended partly on who could remain clean and unexposed. The garment itself was small. The meaning attached to it was not. Women also used soft bands across the chest, often called a strophium or fascia. These were not modern bras. They offered support, warmth, or control beneath flowing fabric. Their purpose could be practical. Keep cloth from shifting during work or exercise. The ancient solution almost worked. A loincloth protected the body and used little fabric. But it had limits. It could chafe, loosen, absorb sweat, and offer little warmth beneath a loose tunic. And it exposed something larger. Clothing was becoming a public language of rank. The question was no longer only what covered the body, it was who was allowed comfort, movement, cleanliness, and privacy. That question would follow underwear for centuries. Rome was not the only place where a hidden layer carried public meaning. In Japan, the fundoshi was a long strip of cloth, wrapped and tied around the hips. For centuries, it served as men's underwear and practical workwear. Its design used very little fabric. That mattered when cloth was costly and washing took effort. Picture a fisherman preparing before dawn. He tightens the knot, then works in wet clothing for hours. A fitted cloth could dry faster than heavy layers, but it also had a limit. The same simple garment offered little protection from cold. Comfort depended on season, occupation, and what a household could afford to wash. In China, trousers developed early for riding and military movement. A divided lower garment changed the problem completely. A rider could sit astride a horse without managing loose robes. Soldiers could move quickly, but the garment also required more cloth and more careful cutting. That difference mattered across long distances. A robe was flexible in daily life. Trousers demanded seams, fitted legs, and stronger construction. They were not automatically private underwear. They were often visible clothing, especially among riders and workers. Still, the divided form created an important possibility. Once legs could be covered separately, another layer could later fit beneath them. Europe took a slower path. For many people, the tunic remained the basic garment near the body. A man could wear a linen shirt beneath wool. In colder weather, he simply added more layers. That system almost worked. Loose clothing was easy to make, repair, and share within a household. But it failed whenever the body moved in demanding ways. Riding, climbing, hauling, and fighting all pulled loose cloth upward. The solution was not yet a neat pair of modern underpants. It was a shift toward garments tied securely at the waist. You can imagine a traveler packing for a muddy road. He needs linen against the skin, wool against the weather, and something that stays put. Clean linen became especially valuable. It could be washed more often than heavier outer wool. That gave the inner layer a new job. It protected expensive clothing from sweat and body oils. For wealthier households, servants and laundresses could keep linen circulating through repeated washing. For poorer families, the same garment might be worn longer, mended repeatedly, and washed less often. So cleanliness became visible even when the cleanest garment was hidden. This was the quiet pressure behind later underwear. The body needed protection. Outer clothing needed preservation. Status demanded that both seem effortless. Yet the emerging solution still belonged mostly to men. In medieval Europe, men would develop loose linen braies beneath their clothing. Women followed a different logic. Their layered gowns and long chemises created privacy without necessarily requiring separate drawers. That difference would shape centuries of argument, not over a small piece of cloth, but over who needed freedom of movement, who could claim modesty, and whose body was expected to remain carefully controlled. Medieval men did not step into fitted underwear. They pulled on braies. Braies were loose linen garments gathered at the waist with a cord. Their shape varied widely. Some ended high on the thigh, others reached toward the knee. A man first tied the linen around his hips. Then he fastened his hose to the same belt. The layers worked together. This was not merely about modesty. Separate hose covered each leg, but needed an anchor. Braies supplied it. Imagine a laborer dressing before daylight. He pulls the drawstring tight, ties on his hose, then adds a wool tunic. Every knot matters when lifting sacks or walking muddy roads. Linen was the crucial material. It could endure repeated washing better than heavy wool. It also kept sweat and body oils away from costly outer garments. But linen had its price. Good cloth required flax, spinning, weaving, and labor. A longer, cleaner pair of braies could signal comfort well before anyone saw it. The wealthy could own several linen garments. A household could rotate them through washing, drying, and mending. Many poorer people had far fewer options. That created an uncomfortable rule of appearance. Cleanliness was private, yet it became a public measure of respectability. Men's braies also reveal a practical medieval compromise. They were loose enough for work and simple enough to repair. Yet they were not especially warm, fitted, or sanitary by modern expectations. Women's clothing followed another system. A woman commonly wore a long linen chemise beneath her gown. Over it came petticoats, skirts, and other layers, depending on place, season, and wealth. Those layers created coverage without separate leg garments. When fabric fell to the ground, drawers could seem unnecessary. That does not mean women had no concern for warmth or privacy. Their solutions simply depended on long shirts and layered skirts. The limit appeared whenever ordinary life demanded different movement. Riding, climbing stairs, working outdoors, or traveling in wind and mud exposed the weakness of loose layers. Yet separate drawers were not automatically the answer. They required extra cloth, extra laundering, and a new habit of dressing. For centuries, that habit remained uneven. Some women may have used divided garments in particular settings, But daily drawers were not a universal European norm. Class made the difference sharper. A woman with servants, enclosed transport, and many garments faced different practical problems than a market seller walking through crowded streets. So medieval underwear was never one hidden uniform. It was a set of bargains between cloth, climate, work, and rank. Braies gave many men a secure base for hose. Women's layers offered another kind of protection. Both systems almost worked. Then cities grew denser, travel accelerated, fashion narrowed outer clothing, and public movement became harder to manage. The missing layer beneath the skirt would soon become a social argument. By the 19th century, the skirt itself was changing. Its fabric became lighter, its shape became wider. Crinolines and hoops could lift the hem away from the legs. That made movement easier in one sense. It also made exposure easier. A gust of wind, a carriage step, or a crowded street could reveal far more than before. Women's drawers answered that new problem with two separate legs, usually joined at the waistband. Early women's drawers were often open at the crotch. That sounds surprising now, but it solved a practical problem. A woman wore several heavy layers. An opening made toileting possible without removing them all. The garment was not immediately accepted as ordinary clothing. Drawers resembled men's undergarments, and critics treated that resemblance as a moral threat. The argument was never only about fabric. Imagine a seamstress climbing narrow stairs with a bundle of cloth. She worked, walked, and took public transport. A divided garment could make each movement more secure. Yet buying drawers required money. Someone had to cut the cloth, sew the seams, hem the legs, and wash them. For a household with little spare linen or cotton, another washable layer meant another expense. The old system had almost worked. It failed when urban life demanded mobility. Then industrial production changed the calculation. Mechanized spinning and weaving made cotton cloth cheaper and more abundant. Ready-made underclothes could increasingly be sold in shops rather than made entirely at home. The new garment arrived with a new burden. If underwear was affordable, people could be judged for not owning enough of it. Cleanliness became tied to regular changing. Laundry became more frequent. Soap, water, fuel, drying space, and women's labor all became part of the hidden layer. A pair of drawers was therefore never just a private purchase. It depended on mills, shops, wash basins, and crowded homes. Men's underdrawers changed as well. Long drawers offered warmth beneath trousers, especially in colder climates. But they could bunch, chafe, and require careful washing. Manufacturers kept adjusting the cut. Buttons closed waistbands. Flaps and openings made dressing more manageable. Knitted fabrics added stretch, though not every worker could afford the newest version. By the Victorian period, underwear carried a strange contradiction. It promised modesty by concealing the body, but it also made the body more discussed, inspected, and regulated. A garment once optional became an expectation. Schools, employers, families, and advice manuals could all turn private habits into tests of respectability. For women, drawers also created a small but real change in freedom. They did not erase unequal rules, but they made cycling, travel, factory work, and public movement less dependent on carefully controlled skirts. That was the price of becoming essential. Underwear brought protection and comfort. It also brought new standards, new purchases, and new ways to police appearance. The next transformation would come from bodies in motion, athletes, soldiers, workers, and consumers demanding garments that moved with them. Sport exposed the limits of old underwear first. A runner could not sprint comfortably in long drawers. A cyclist needed support, but not loose fabric catching beneath shorts. The athletic jockstrap offered one answer. It supported the body with straps and an elastic waistband, but it was specialized equipment, not everyday clothing. Then manufacturers borrowed the logic of sport. In the 1930s, Coopers introduced a short, legless men's garment called the jockey. Its overlapping Y-shaped front made access possible without buttons. The cut used knit fabric and elastic. It held close to the body, yet removed the heavy legs of the union suit. Picture a shop window in Chicago during winter. A mannequin stands in a tiny pair of white briefs. The display seems almost absurd beside coats and snow. Yet the store sold its first stock quickly. Within months, the new brief was selling nationally. Its success was not just about bold advertising. The garment solved a physical problem. Trousers had become narrower and more standardized. Beneath them, loose drawers could wrinkle, bunch, and show through the fabric. Briefs used less material and stayed in place, but a close fit created its own demand. Sizing now mattered more. So did reliable elastic. A waistband that lost its stretch could turn a useful garment into a sagging inconvenience. Factories had to make knit fabric, seams, and elastic work together repeatedly. Women's lower body underwear also moved toward lighter, shorter forms. As hemlines rose and ready-to-wear clothing expanded, bulky layers became harder to hide. Knitted combinations, tap pants, and other soft undergarments appeared in shops and catalogs. They were sold as practical, washable, and modern. Still, they were not equally available to everyone. A garment could be cheap at the counter, yet expensive in the home. It needed washing, drying, replacement, and storage. War made that hidden infrastructure impossible to ignore. For soldiers, underwear was part of supply. It had to be packed, issued, washed, and replaced across enormous distances. A damp or filthy underlayer was not a private embarrassment. It could make marching miserable and add to the daily burden of military life. Imagine a serviceman sorting his kit: socks, shirt, drawers, soap. Each item is small. Together, they determine whether a body can keep moving. After the wars, civilian clothing absorbed the same expectation. Underwear should be light, standardized, and easy to change. Synthetic fibers and improved elastic widened the choices. They could create smooth fabrics, stronger waistbands, and cuts that returned to shape after movement. That convenience had a cost. Underwear became increasingly disposable in spirit. A worn seam or tired elastic no longer invited repair. It invited another purchase. And the old moral language began to shift. Respectability still mattered, but comfort and personal preference gained ground. The hidden layer was becoming less like a rule imposed on the body. It was becoming a choice about the body. For women, choice meant more than choosing a fabric. It meant choosing how much freedom a garment allowed. A woman boarding a bus in a narrow skirt needed underwear that moved quietly beneath it. By the mid-20th century, panties had become shorter, softer, and increasingly sold in standard sizes. Cotton remained familiar and washable. Nylon offered a smoother, lighter alternative. Elastic turned the waist and leg openings into flexible edges rather than drawstrings or buttons. That changed the daily routine. A garment could be pulled on quickly, worn under close-fitting clothes, and washed with ordinary laundry. But standardization created another limit. Bodies did not become standard simply because factories preferred standard sizes. A waistband could pinch. A synthetic fabric could feel unpleasant in heat. A cut designed for a mannequin could fail during a day of walking, sitting, lifting, and working. So the modern hidden layer became a market of competing compromises: coverage or freedom, durability or softness, low cost or a garment that lasted. Consider a department store aisle after the war. Packets hang in rows, sorted by size, color, and material. The customer no longer needs a seamstress to make every pair, yet she must choose from shapes designed by manufacturers, advertisers, and changing ideals of the body. That is why underwear never became merely private. In the later 20th century, youth fashion pushed waistlines lower. Sportswear demanded stretch. Women entered workplaces where trousers became ordinary clothing, not a provocation. Each outer garment created a new practical demand beneath it. Visible panty lines became a problem only when thin, close-fitting clothes made them visible. New cuts answer that problem by reducing seams and coverage. Some people welcomed the change. Others found the new styles restrictive, impractical, or simply unnecessary. The right to choose did not mean every choice felt liberating. It meant the old assumption had weakened. No single moral rule could easily dictate what everybody should wear. Today, underwear still carries the traces of its long history. A cotton brief preserves the old promise of washable protection. An elastic waistband comes from industrial knitting and chemical materials. A sports cut remembers the runner and cyclist who could not move in loose drawers. And a package bought without ceremony reflects a major social change. For centuries, this layer was shaped by rank, climate, laundry, labor, and public judgment. Now it is often chosen for comfort first. Not always. Fashion and shame still intrude. But the garment beneath our clothes is no longer only a hidden rule. It can also be a small, everyday decision about how a person wants to live in their own body. That decision is still shaped by forces most shoppers never see. Cotton must be grown, spun, knitted, dyed, cut, packed, and transported. Elastic depends on industrial materials that age, stretch, and eventually lose their grip. A cheap multi-pack solves one problem immediately. It can also make replacement feel easier than repair. That would have seemed strange to generations who patched linen until it could no longer hold. Consider a modern laundry basket. There may be sports underwear, cotton briefs, shapewear, seamless styles, and garments designed for periods. Each answers a particular demand. One reduces friction during movement. One survives repeated hot washes. One disappears beneath thin fabric. One gives protection during a monthly routine that older clothing systems handled very differently. The variety can look trivial, but it records a larger shift. Underwear is now expected to adapt to the wearer, not force the wearer into one accepted shape. That expectation remains incomplete. Sizes still exclude many bodies. Marketing still creates anxieties that manufacturers can conveniently sell back to us. And clothing waste has made the disposable side of mass production harder to ignore. Yet the old logic has changed. A medieval laborer needed braies that could be washed and retied. A 19th century woman needed drawers that allowed her to travel without public scandal. A factory worker needed affordable garments made in reliable sizes. A modern buyer may need softness, support, mobility, or simply the right not to explain their choice. The object is small, its history is not. For thousands of years, people used cloth beneath clothing to protect skin and manage work. Then that hidden cloth became entangled with rank, morality, and gender. Factories made it cheap enough to become ordinary. Elastic made it fit differently. Sport and changing public life made movement a design requirement. And modern choices slowly weakened the idea that one proper garment belonged to everybody. So what did people wear before briefs and panties? They wore whatever their climate, work, wealth, and social rules made practical. A wrapped loincloth, loose linen braies, a chemise beneath layered skirts, drawers tied with tapes. Later garments cut, stitched, and sold in standardized packets. Modern underwear was never a single invention. It was the accumulated answer to an intimate problem. How do you cover the body, protect it, move through the world, and still remain yourself? If you enjoyed the history of something almost nobody sees, but nearly everyone wears, subscribe. Here we uncover the ordinary objects that quietly changed human civilization. Modern underwear did not arrive with one brilliant invention. It emerged through many small compromises. Factories made cotton garments cheaper and more consistent. Elastic changed the fit. Sport demanded less chafing and greater movement. Military supply systems rewarded garments that were compact, washable, and easy to issue. Think of a worker dressing before dawn. There is no servant to mend linen ties. No time to negotiate layers of fabric. A ready-made garment, sold in a packet, solves that morning's problem. It also creates a new expectation. Underwear should fit quickly, wash easily, and stay unnoticed. That expectation reshaped the hidden layer. Older garments often asked the body to adapt. A loincloth had to be wrapped. Braies had to be tied. Drawers could bunch, loosen, or show beneath fashionable clothing. Modern cuts increasingly worked in the opposite direction. They followed legs, hips, movement, and the changing shapes of outer clothes. But convenience came with a cost. Industrial underwear encouraged replacement instead of repair. Cotton had to be grown, spun, knitted, dyed, cut, packed, and shipped. Elastic stretches, weakens, and eventually fails. The cheap multi-pack solves an immediate need. It can also turn a once-repaired garment into something disposable. Look inside a modern laundry basket. There may be athletic underwear, cotton briefs, seamless styles, period underwear, and shapewear. Each responds to a particular pressure. One reduces friction during movement. One survives repeated hot washes. One vanishes beneath thin fabric. One offers protection during a monthly routine. This variety is not trivial. It records a long change in who gets to decide. For centuries, what belonged beneath clothing was shaped by climate, labor, rank, and public judgment. A medieval laborer needed linen braies that could be washed and retied. A woman in the 19th century could face suspicion for wearing drawers. The garment offered mobility, yet critics treated that mobility as a moral problem. Today, a buyer may choose softness, support, coverage, or no extra layer at all. The freedom is still incomplete. Sizes exclude many bodies. Advertising can turn ordinary discomfort into insecurity. And clothing waste makes mass production harder to celebrate without question. Still, the old logic has weakened. There is no single, proper, hidden garment for every body. So what did people wear before briefs and panties? They wore what their world made practical: a wrapped loincloth, loose linen braies, a long chemise beneath layered skirts, drawers tied with tapes. Later, standardized garments cut, stitched, and sold by the dozen. Modern underwear was never a single invention. It was an accumulated answer to an intimate question. How do you protect the body, move freely, and remain yourself? If you enjoyed the history of something almost nobody sees but nearly everyone wears, subscribe. Here we uncover the ordinary objects that quietly changed human civilization.